which I actually already talked about like a week ago in another class, but we're going to talk about it from Europe's point of view, not America's necessarily. So we're going to talk about this movement that came out of the Renaissance and Reformation and the scientific revolution. So we have this timeline here just to kind of give you an idea of it says reign of Louis this. I don't know why that's on there. I guess this is from France's point of view. But right on the cusp of the Renaissance and the beginning of that scientific revolution is what's called the Age of Reason. And during that Age of Reason is when a lot of new ideas start to come forward about the way the whole world works. And the reason for that it affects how music is written, how people converse with each other. It affects just the exchange of thoughts in a sort of general way. They begin to believe that life is more complicated than the early philosophers, but the early philosophers were onto something. So let's actually study them a little more deeply and ask the questions they asked with this new, more modern information that we have, being as how we're all up in the 1600s ourselves. So we're not as ancient as the ancients. So people would meet in salons, and they would have these conversations comparing the works of the ancient philosophers and saying, do we still agree with them, or what changes do we feel like need to be made? They would take new instruments, new music that was coming out, and they would perform it, and they would just discuss things, read new books, and it was sort of an occupation of the rich to have ideas and share them with each other. And we call this era the Enlightenment. It had its downsides, and we'll come back to this painting later. This is a painting of Galileo talking to a recalcitrant student, and then this is a scientific experiment being done in a parlor surrounded by people who don't appreciate it. So we're going to come back to that later, that there was a kickback to the Enlightenment. But it all kind of begins with Newton and then Apple, which probably didn't really happen. Just FYI, that's anecdotal. So Newton probably didn't actually get hit in the head with an apple, but everybody believes that that's where he first started contemplating his ideas about gravity and using his ideas about gravity, which were not only his ideas about gravity, he had like 6 other people that were also working on them. But he began to play with this idea that through experimentation, you could understand anything. You could figure out the answers to things. And it was actually possible for people to figure out the answers to everything. And Isaac Newton was a culminative scientist, even though he didn't really like other people very much. He still worked with other people's ideas and then took them to the next place. One of the things that he liked to do was experiment with light, but he was a weirdo. So like he experimented with optics by sticking needles in his own eyes. The guy was kind of freaky, but his theory was sound, that if you experiment, you can find answers, and that there should be a method for that. There should be some kind of process by which you can be sure that you hit all the steps from having an idea to testing that idea to proving that idea. And so he expressed aloud what became the scientific method, which was something that other people in the same era were also working on, but he was the one that put it in print. He was also the one that put the laws of physics into print. So other scientists grasped onto this idea and started to work with it. If we can do science experiments and understand things, then it's possible that we could do scientific experiments and understand everything. All answers are possible. There will be a time in about 200 years after this when people start to realize that he might have been wrong about that it's not possible to understand everything, because things change, because things are flexible, because things are movable, because the laws of physics where we are right now might not be the laws of physics someplace else. But for now, it gave people a great deal of excitement to be able to say, we're investigating the scientific ramifications of this, and we're trying to find answers that we've wondered about for a really long time. And since we're already having a breakdown in the power of the church, we can do it without fear of burning at the stake. So that's cool. One of the fields in which this moved into this kind of interesting is social science. If through experimentation and observation, you can understand how the particles of the world work, how gravity works, how fundamental forces work, then maybe you can also understand how people work and why people form into the societies that they do. And so there's this whole subcategory of scientists that come out of this called social scientists. And they believe that you can use the scientific method to understand people and society. So at the top of that list is Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes is an Enlightenment thinker, but he's pretty early. 1651, he wrote the book Leviathan. And a Leviathan is actually a book about how societies are formed. And his basic theory, just boiling it down to its bare essentials, is that life is nasty, brutish, and short. That people in their natural state, and he talks about natural a lot, people in their natural state would just kill each other and would just die. And that in their most natural state, they're just wild animals, people are, basically. If you want your family to survive, you can't just be out there on your own. You can't just be in your most natural state. You have to start building something new. And that's how societies build. Because life is so nasty and brutish and short, people bond together to build societies to protect themselves. That's why they do what they do. So take a look at this cover. This is an actual book cover from his book. This is not a modernization of it. This is what it looked like when it was printed. So this is his book cover. What do you see?
A man standing on top of the world.
Okay, a man. What is the man made of? Right, it's a man made of men. And that's the monster that he was describing. The Leviathan that he was describing was the ruler. What happens in these societies is that men bond together to form something new that has its own personality, a society that has its own personality, and that at the head of that society is a king. But that king is built out of the men that form his society. So it's a man made out of men. That's what society is. That's what a civilization is. A kingdom is. A kingdom is a being that is made out of people. So that's what the Leviathan is. They look for protection because they are weak. They look for protection from the strong because they're afraid. John Locke took this idea, and in 1690, he introduced another idea to it. Let's take a closer look at what those individual people are like. John Locke believed that everybody was born in their natural state with those fears, with those, same things that Thomas Hobbes was talking about, but also with a knowledge of their own right to life, with a knowledge of their own right to liberty, and their right to the pursuit of property. They had their own, people are born with the knowledge that they have the right to be alive, that they have the right to make their own decisions, and that they have the right to secure their own property. That people know that somewhere deep inside their core, that people are aware when they're born that those are their rights. Those are their natural rights. So that man made out of men that you see here is made out of men who each individually believe in their own right to be alive. None of them believes I'm expendable. All of them believe I deserve to live. So that man made out of men owes it to the people that he's made out of. The kingdom owes it to the people to protect those rights, to protect that right of life, to protect that right of liberty, to protect that right of property. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't deserve to be king. And that's all there is to that. John Locke believed that people were born as blank slates, and that as tabula rasa, and that people built, except for those natural rights, those beliefs, everything else could be given to them. This is how you protect your life. This is how you build your property. This is how you exist in this society, because they're blank slates when they start. But they have in their core this belief that they have those rights, and they do, given to them by heaven. They have this, in their creation is the right to be alive, and the right to have liberty, and the right to pursue property. Well, the Enlightenment movement really loved that. So Adam Smith was born right in the middle of this culmination of social scientists. So I'm going to talk a little about Adam Smith, is one of my favorites. He's one of my favorite Enlightenment thinkers. So he was born in Scotland, which was sort of the beginning of the Enlightenment. Actually kicks off in Scotland and then moves into England. Because it was in Scotland that a geologist discovered that the world was not 6,000 years old. Because there were rocks in a wall that had been built where the rocks were actually older than 6,000 years old. And it was really obvious that that was not true. So it was in Scotland that the first universities started teaching the kickback against those ideas. So he was born into the middle of an already pretty free-thinking society, and also kind of a stubborn society, Scottish people, stubborn. I know, because I'm one of them. But he spent his childhood in a house that overlooked the marketplace. And every week he would look out and watch the market below his window and watch how it worked. And he started to notice that there was something happening in that marketplace that you couldn't put a finger on. People were talking to each other in their words. They were using words to talk to each other. They were talking about the weather. They were talking about their children. Every once in a while, they would talk about a transaction, but there was another language taking place underneath that wasn't in words. It was happening in currency. Everybody was participating in contracts constantly. I give you this, you give me that. You own that now, and I own this now. And everybody was fine with that. It worked seamlessly in the market. I want that bread, I have these coins. We agree to trade these items, I walk away. We don't even have to talk about it. We can talk about our kids while this is happening, this invisible language that happened in the marketplace. So as he grew up, he tried to figure out a way to express that, what was happening there, because it was massive trust exercise happening in the marketplace every week. Everybody had agreed to be part of this contract. And there might be a dispute now and then, but overall, everybody had an idea of what the language was and how it worked. And he was just absolutely fascinated by it. He began to extend that out, and he proposed this idea. In addition to the natural rights that John Locke said everybody had, the right to live, the right to liberty, the right to property, people were also born with an inherent sense of right and wrong. What do y'all think about that? Do you think that's true?
Yeah.
Do you think that everybody
Definitely think that's true.
born with an idea of things being right and things being wrong?
Yeah.
Do you think that only has to be taught?
I think you're born with it, but it has to be enhanced on as you get older.
Yeah, okay, well, but whether or not that code is automatically there, and this sets us apart from other creatures, this code of right and wrong, this theory of moral sin, and he wrote this book, The Theory of Moral Sin. I could prove it to you in like really, really fast if you want me to. Do you want me to? Are you interested? Huh?
Toddlers are butts to each other.
Huh?
I said toddlers are butts to each other.
They are, and you know in your core that that's wrong. Okay, I could do it really simply if you want. Are you interested? Okay, let's see. I don't want to leave the Zoom people out here, so let me do this real quick. Let's see if I can do this. I'm gonna need Tiana's help and Lisa's help. Can y'all see Tiana and Lisa there? No, stay.
Okay.
Stay wherever you are. Okay, let's pretend for a minute that this was more of a face-to-face class and that I got to do all of this without being around my desk. I don't know if you'll know this, but when I teach face-to-face and we're not in the middle of a pandemic, I wander all over the class. Okay, so I walk all up and down the aisles and I talk to the students and everything because I don't have to worry about talking to the camera, which is pointing at my desk right now. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that as I'm walking along, and the way that you see, you just moved because you knew that was wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, put your foot out. Let's say you didn't move. Okay, let's say that I was walking along, I didn't pay attention. I tripped over Lisa's foot and I fell and I hit my face on the floor and I cracked and blood spilled all out of my skull. And I passed out cold and they had to call an ambulance. Okay, you got that image in your head?
Yeah.
All right, let's set that image aside. Let's say instead, as I'm walking, Tiana, who's mad at me for not grading her essay yet, just decides to reach out and trip me. And everybody sees Tiana do it. She just reaches out her foot and trips me on purpose. And I catch myself. Now, of these two women, who is more wrong? Who did the more wrong thing?
You did.
The one that tripped you on purpose.
What, I didn't take any damage. I didn't fall.
Yeah, but
It was the malice behind it.
It was bad.
It was your fault. You should have been over there in the first place.
All right, Chris is standing up for both of the women and saying it's my fault. I shouldn't have been wandering to begin with. But that's
Especially not with like social distancing and stuff.
of these two people, which is the more wrong? Is it Lisa or is it Tiana?
Tiana.
Yeah, right? Okay, does everybody pretty much agree? Can I get a hands up or something? Do we all vote that Tiana is more wrong here?
Yeah.
Right, because even though I took absolutely no damage and I'm not going to need massive surgery and come out of a coma and need rehabilitation, thanks by the way, Lisa.
Oh, right.
Even because of all of that not being an issue, the intent was wrong. Okay, so this is what Adam Smith was talking about. We know in our hearts that Having an intention like that is wrong. Animals don't behave that way. Think about it for a minute. Animals don't behave as you don't actually hurt the animal, your intent is not more wrong to them. So that's something that we just do as humans. And Adam Smith believed that that was true. So now we've got a man made out of men who is malice is motive. Yes, thank you, Tommy. Lack of empathy, Brooklyn. Okay. Yes, I agree. Okay. So in addition to being, that man made out of men is now made out of people who are not just blank slates who can be taught, not just people who have a natural right to their life, to their liberty, and to their property, but also people who have a code of right and wrong. So that man made out of men has gotten really complicated, hasn't it? That's the Enlightenment society, though. That's what has happened. He publishes his book in 1759, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, and then he begins to explore that.
Wait, you're not presenting the Zoom.
Oh, I'm not. Oh no. Thank you for letting me know. Share screen. Okay, from current slide.
Okay, you're presenting now.
All right, cool. All right. So in 1759, he publishes another, or 1776, he publishes another book, because he has spent a couple of decades working on that whole invisible marketplace contract thing. If the marketplace is built out of people who have a right to life, liberty, and property, who have an invisible code of right and wrong, then there should be a way that reflects in the economy. There should be a way that that reflects in the market. And what he sees in his country is a country that is so buried in mercantilism, in keeping their hands on the colonies and trying to force them to make whatever they want, that they've actually signed away their whole economy to the East India Trading Company at this point. All of England is buried under this great big trading company that has 60,000 of its own troops and its own navy, and it's become so expensive that it's about to literally implode. And the entire economy is based on it. So he writes this book, The Wealth of Nations, to try to convince his own country, let the people build their own economy. Let the free market be free. Take your hands off of it. Let people excel at what they excel at. And if they don't prosper, they'll find something else to do. Let the rich, the wealthy rise by spending money on the lower class, and therefore the lower class will also rise and lift up the rich. Let that be the way this works. That's a true free market economy that he was writing about. So in the midst of all of this, there is this whole new idea of what a society should be. A society should be made out of people who are free, who are prosperous, who are able to prosper, who are not under any kind of restrictions on their prosperity, but who are able to respect each other's right to life and liberty as well. That's the perfect Enlightenment society, which is cool because what we have in the world at this time are a bunch of empires that are forming colonies and trying to figure out how to get rich off of them. Jean-Jacques Rousseau also is a social scientist that writes a little bit after Adam Smith. Rousseau believes that Thomas Hobbes had it wrong, that people in their natural form are not nasty, brutish, and short, that it's actually the acquisition of property that makes them that way. And that if they were to completely surrender themselves to the society, then they would be happier. They would be more free because they wouldn't have all those worries about trying to get their own property. They'd just give whatever they got to the society as a whole, and the society would take care of them. In their most natural state, that's what everybody really wants, is to be taken care of by their society. We're going to come back to Rousseau because his ideas don't catch on right away, but you have his social contract on Blackboard. I'm not going to have an assignment on it this week. It's kind of like the Wesley thing. It's heavy. So you might want to start taking a look at it now and then read it before the first exam, the second exam. So there's a good chance I'll ask a question about it then. In the middle of all of this Enlightenment thought, there are wars breaking out between France and England. France and England are going to war with each other, and because they are both now global colonizers, those wars affect the entire world. Okay, so the 7 Years' War actually takes place on every major, it's actually the First World War. It takes place on every continent because it takes place except Australia, which is complicated, but on every major continent, except Australia, France and England now have holdings and they are doing battle with each other. In America, that's the French and Indian War. We fight this war in America on the side of the English against the French, with native allies to each that are against each other, you know. So that's the way that that takes place. It is a wildly expensive war, and it requires that people who had otherwise been free give their attention and their energy and their blood to this cause that may or may not actually affect them. This is a war that's happening all over the world, but the Americans in the colonies have to deal with it because the French colonies are dealing with it. You see what I'm saying? So it's the first time that everybody is in this man made out of men is suddenly sucked into battle together. It's not the first time the kingdoms have fought or anything like that, but it's the first time that it's stretched out over this wide of an area because it's after colonialism starts. Now remember that because of the Reformation, there was this rise of absolutist leaders who believed that they needed to stamp down on, because in the Reformation, peasants revolted. In the Reformation, peasants began to think that they had power. So after the Reformation, there are a bunch of kings who rise in France and England and Spain and the Holy Roman Empire who believe that they have to take away the rights of the peasants, have to clamp down on the rights of the peasants. So they're absolutist leaders. In England, that absolutist leader's name is King George III. And if you watch Hamilton, he's the guy that sings in Hamilton. That's King George III. But people apparently don't watch Hamilton, so never mind. Anyway, he, in order to make up for—
I absolutely watch Hamilton.
Good, thank you. Oh my gosh.
Wonderful musical, not even gonna lie.
I have seen it a bazillion times since July.
Okay, so I'll be back. That's George III. The king that's on the stage in Hamilton is George III. He is an absolute leader. An absolute ruler who's not very good at his job, who has appointed a prime minister who's not very good at his job. And they are both trying to solve the problem of how do we not go bankrupt, what with the East India Company going under and us having just paid for this war that we couldn't really afford to begin with. How do we not go bankrupt? And his answer is to try to soak that money out of the colonies. He begins to, all of these acts, the Stamp Act, the Declaratory Act, the Townshend Act, the Intolerable Acts, in order to tax the colonies for more money so that he can get more money out of the colonies. As a result, the colonies become a place of great tension, of incredible tension, like a little bit of something can cause them to really blow up. The example that I have is the Boston Massacre, which was an argument between a wig maker's apprentice and a soldier who hadn't paid his bill. But because there were English troops in the English colonies treating the English colonists like they needed to be guarded by troops, there was already a lot of tension and a powder keg of things going on. So when a fight broke out between this wig maker's apprentice and the soldier that owed his master money, they gathered friends and began to throw rocks and snowballs at each other until somebody opened fire and then people were killed. You know, this is the presence of the troops in the colonies caused all of this tension. It manifested itself in the Boston Tea Party, which was an event in which over $1.5 million of current day damage that would have been worth about $1.5 million worth of damage was done when they threw over the tea that they were being forced to buy from the East India Company in order to save the East India Company's butt. All of these things were fueled by an Enlightenment thinker whose name was Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine took the ideas of John Locke and the ideas of Adam Smith and wrote Common Sense, which basically said, which step by step took the arguments against independence and argued against them by saying, Britain has been our parent and Britain is our mother. We can't just walk away from Britain. Yes, we can. It's a bad parent. And we're not all Britain's children anymore. We've come from all different places now. Oh, but this has been working fine for us for several generations now. That's like saying a baby is fine as long as it has milk, so it never needs to grow and have its own food. You know, he took one argument after another and he just dismissed them. And in this circle, and he also set forth a new idea for a new plan of government that took that man made out of men and instead put law at the center of that. Instead of putting a crown on the head of a person, he would put a crown on the law and put the law right at the center. So in the wake of all of this Enlightenment thinking, Common Sense comes out in January. February, England blockades all the American ports. In March, Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations. And from April to June, all of the colonies wrote their own declarations of independence until in June, the Congress decided to write one. And now we have a Revolutionary War. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson was an Enlightenment thinker. Thomas Paine was an Enlightenment thinker. Ben Franklin was an Enlightenment thinker. These were people that went and sat in those parlors in France and talked about all of these ideas about people having a right to life, liberty, and happiness. It's happiness in the Declaration of Independence, because even Thomas Jefferson recognizes that some people will go their whole lives without getting property. So he put pursuit of happiness instead. But all of these are Enlightenment thinkers who have been told that in their study of the philosophers, everybody has these rights, and a king who doesn't respect them needs to be overthrown. And so that's what they bring back into the colonies, and that's what sparks the Revolutionary War. When France assists in the Revolutionary War, they are doing it under the orders of an absolutist king. King Louis the 16th, yeah, King Louis the 16th, it's right there, I just can't read Roman numerals. King Louis the 16th believes that by helping the colonists, he will be actually kicking the crap out of England, who beat him in the 7 Years' War. So he lends his support to the colonists because he knows that that will cost England more than he will lose by ripping their colonies out from under them. But it also helps that Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson have been going to Paris and having these conversations with members of the king's court and having these back and forth conversations. So he assisted the American Revolution, and as a result, they end up really, really deeply in debt to Spain. He decides to take the debt that he has now because of Spain, and just like King George did, he decides to try to take it out on his own people, to try to recoup the losses in his own people. He divides his population up by districts, and the third estate of those districts, what was called the third estate, was peasants, and those peasants did something that he wasn't expecting. They elected upperclassmen to represent them. So they elected people that were richer than them to be their representatives, which meant that they had a stronger voice than he expected them to have. So the third estate, the peasants of France, declare themselves independent the same way that America declared itself independent. But we're not talking about a separate colony here. We're talking about inside the country of France, the peasants declare themselves an independent nation inside the country of France. And as a result, the king marches troops in to fight with them about it. Peasants flood the streets and storm the Bastille. That's why they have Bastille Day in France. And they take over and begin to execute nobles. The third estate of peasants begins to cut the heads off of that Leviathan. They believe that they need to actually physically execute the leaders that put them in this situation. So 30,000 of the nobles in France are executed by the peasants of France during what's called the Reign of Terror, including King Louis XVI and his wife. They tried to flee to Austria, and Austria, because Queen Marie Antoinette was from Austria, because they tried to flee to Austria and couldn't, Austria threatened to attack, and so the National Assembly executed them because they had threatened, Austria had threatened to attack. So they executed them. So Marie Antoinette, the let them eat cake person, probably didn't actually say that. So in the third stage of this revolution, slightly less bloodthirsty people decides to seize control, get the peasants under control and get the government under control, and replace the assembly that the peasants had created with what's called the Directory. They divide it into two legislations. They're trying to model it loosely after what's happening over in America, but they are used to having a king, and they don't know how to be a Congress. You got to remember, the colonies in France were run by the king. They weren't run by the people. The colonies in France were controlled by the king. These are not a people who've ever had a frontier. These are not a people who've ever been separate from their king. So even when they seize power, they don't know how to run it. So they end up with two branches of legislation that are supposed to be controlling things, and they end up with the military. And of those three things, the only thing that's stable, that has a power structure that still works, is the military. And who have we got in the military? The person that they call in to help them has been in Northern Africa and Egypt, engaged in a campaign against Italy and Egypt, and a campaign against Austria. And the Directory basically contacts him and says, we're going to need your help. There's still riots and stuff happening here in France. So Napoleon Bonaparte rides back into France, returns from all of these successful campaigns against Austria and against Egypt, and comes back in and takes one look at what's going on and says, this is not going to work, and overthrows the entire Directory and takes it in.
That's a little short man.
That's the little short man. Yeah, he's up on a camel. So I know that's why. But so Napoleon takes over in France. Meanwhile, in Haiti, which is one of the holdings of Spanish and French, each own about half of the island that we now know as Haiti. They don't call it that, but let me see. Do I actually go into the whole Haiti thing? As a reaction to what's happened, what has successfully happened in America, and as a reaction to the chaos in France, there is an uprising in Haiti. Toussaint Louverture, and let's talk just for a second about him. Santo Domingo is a very rich European colony. It's very rich. The West is owned by the French, this part is owned by the French, and this part is owned by the Spanish. And the population is split between the races. 30,000 of them are white settlers. 28,000 of them are mulattoes, which are plantation owning slaves. Okay, so they were, or plantation, or they're African descendant people who own slaves and who own plantations. Okay, and that's based on the fact that they're not 100% African. So they've been able to, through the French system, which allowed you to rise if one of your parents was white, you know, they have managed to become slave owning plantation owners themselves. There are 28,000 of those mulattoes, and there are about 500,000 black slaves in Haiti at this time. So in an attempt to squeeze more money out of their colonies to make up for this revolution that they helped with, France squeezes the colonies that they have. So they squeeze the colony, this part of their colony, which is France. They're really worried that the white plantation owners and the black plantation owners will join forces and resist them. But what actually happens, so they institute these racist measures to try to keep the mulatto slave owners under control. They institute new rules and regulations that separate what the white plantation owners can do from what the black plantation owners can do, because they're afraid that the combined power of those 30,000 white plantation owners and those 28,000 black plantations would be more than they could deal with. So they institute racist measures to separate them. Instead, what happens, and this is going to come as a shock to all of y'all, is that the black plantation owners free and make friends with the 500,000 slaves instead. So instead of facing an army of about 50 to 60,000 plantation owners, they are now facing an army of about 550,000 angry black people, okay? So those are led by this guy, Toussaint Louverture, who was himself trained by the Spanish military. At a young age, he ran away from his plantation and ran from the French side to the Spanish side, and he went raised up through the ranks and became a high-ranking officer in the Spanish military. He came back to the French side and organized the military. And if you ever read accounts about the revolution in Haiti, the biggest thing that you read on the side of the French is, we didn't know they could get organized. We had no idea they even had that capacity. They sent French troops to Haiti. Napoleon sent French troops to Haiti to put down the rebellion there, with the understanding that as soon as those white French troops landed, all the black people would go crazy and not be able to do anything because they can't organize. They're slaves. They have no abilities. They have no intelligence. So the fact that they were able to do that came as a complete shock to the people to the military of France. The National Assembly sent troops to reestablish order. Spain invaded the French half of the island, and France, and it finally confirmed the abolition and basically said, you can have it. Haiti is yours. They handed Haiti over to the Haitian residents that were there and said, you're all free and Haiti is yours. We don't need this kind of headache anymore. Napoleon basically cut his losses. It's more complicated than that, but basically, at one point when Napoleon took over in 1802, he did send French forces in to reestablish the colonies. Not necessarily the slavery part, but to reestablish French ownership of the colonies. We didn't mean that y'all owned it. We just meant that y'all could, you know, that slaves would be free now. But we're still in charge here. We're still in charge. This is a French colony. And as a result, let's see, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, I don't have a slide for him, but Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who was a former slave, betrayed Toussaint and rose to his own power and managed to establish himself as the emperor of Haiti. Okay, this happened within, you know, just a few hundred miles of the southern states of North America. So it scared the bejesus out of the southern states of North America. If the slaves can revolt and win this close to our coastline, what might happen in our own plantations? So this was a big deal that this happened. Eventually, Bonaparte, who immediately gets involved in a whole bunch of land wars, we're going to talk about that more on Tuesday of next week, gets rid of Haiti, just decides that they can have Haiti. Jean-Jacques Dessalines can have it, it's his now. And then he sells Louisiana too. So he sells his North American colonies too. And basically takes a step back and just moves back into Europe and puts all of his attention back into Europe.
Question,
Yes.
did he survive after the guy became an emperor?
Oh, no. No, he was arrested and killed. He was, Jean-Jacques Dessalines was his right-hand man, was his like second in command. And he betrayed him to Bonaparte so that he would be arrested, and then he took over.
Wow.
So yeah, there's a whole big dramatic story there, but unfortunately we don't have time for it. Okay, so. Say what? Oh my gosh, there is actually a really fascinating movie about that. I'm trying to think of what it's called. I'll look it up and I'll let you know, but there's actually a really fascinating movie about the song.
You have a question in the chat.
Oh, what is it? Let me see. Oh, about Toussaint. So yeah, I don't know if it's a musical. I know that there is a movie. I don't know if it's a musical.
What's the musical with Jean-Jacques in it? They did the one with they rebooted it into a movie and it has Anne Hathaway in it.
Are you talking about Hamilton?
No, I'm talking about the French Revolution musical.
Oh yes, you talking about Les Miserables? Are you talking about Les Miserables?
Yes.
Okay, Les Miserables is it happens a little bit later, and I promise that when we get to it, I'll point to it and I'll say, this is what that is. This is what that revolution is. That's part of a revolution that happens a little bit later. But yeah, it's not against Napoleon, it's later, because France is messy for a long time. All right, so some legacies of the Enlightenment, but I want you to look at these sentences. Isaac Newton was given a dispensation to serve at Cambridge in spite of his religious beliefs. Okay, so we've moved from punishing people who are scientists to rewarding them with Cambridge job positions, so that's good. The colonists were taxed without representation. The King and Queen of France were executed by the National Assembly. Toussaint Louverture was betrayed by Dessalines, who eventually declared himself emperor. What do all of these, you know what, I already improved this slide, so I'm going to go back to the other slide. Hold on one second with me, would you? I'm going to find it in my Dropbox because I made a change to it that's kind of important.
Hey, Mindy,
Yes.
they should watch The Scarlet Pimpernel.
Oh, I agree. If you want to watch,
I love that movie so much.
if you want to watch a movie that's a book that was written about the Reign of Terror, where they're killing, there's something called The Scarlet Pimpernel, which is kind of a Robin Hood story about somebody who snuck aristocrats out to safety in some of the wildest ways.
Isn't that Lord of the Rings stuff?
No,
There's actually two movies. One was made in the 30s and one was made in the 80s.
I saw the one in the 80s.
Yeah.
I like the
The
one.
one in the 80s is definitely my favorite.
Do I have this here? No. I have it here. I'm sorry, bear with me for just a second. I'm going to get this other slide down. I know we're running out of time, but we're going to cover this right. Maybe.
Jordan says she likes your outfit.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, I do like your outfit now.
The one in the 80s is the one where he's always talking about the other guy's fashion, and it has the guy from Lord of the Rings in it. No. Oh my gosh, Chris.
Yeah, Jane Seymour's in it.
Gandalf.
It's gonna be a sad day when he passes.
Yeah,
Ian McKellen.
yeah, he's not allowed. Okay, well, I don't know what happened to the slide that I was using for this. I'm sort of mad it's not here. Okay. Well, then I'll have to do it in your Blackboard. Okay, what do all of these sentences have in common? Can anybody tell me?
Passive voice.
Why you gotta be this way? Okay, let's get back into this. Okay, so all of these sentences are examples of passive voice. Okay, And you might not think that's important, but we're going to talk about it anyway. So where's my PowerPoint? There it is. Okay, from current slide. Okay, these are all examples of things that are written in passive voice. So let's talk for a minute about passive voice. We got about 10 minutes, so that's what we're going to spend the end of our class on. Okay, passive voice can be very simple to spot and fix. It can be, but it can also be kind of tricky. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pull up a screen and I'm going to just write, Chris was hit. That is an example of a passive voice sentence. We don't know what hit Chris, who is responsible for what hit Chris. There's information missing, right? So it's kind of a weak sentence. Chris was hit. Nobody's surprised that Chris was hit because Chris is asking to be hit a lot. But okay, so let's say just for the sake of argument, that in the middle of class with so many interruptions happening, Alicia decided to hit Chris. Decided to throw something at him and hit him. Now we know Chris was hit by Alicia. Okay, what defines this? Can y'all see this Word document I'm working in right now? Zoom people?
Yeah, we can.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what defines this as a passive sentence is the use of the word was. Okay, he was hit. That's not a thing that's happening right now. It's just a statement of something that happened. Okay, that's what makes it weak. So to write this as an active sentence, the easiest thing to do is to move these words around and say Alicia hit Chris. Okay, now it is an active sentence. Okay, so you can fix the missing information by adding things to the end, but it's still going to be a clumsy sentence because it's going to be passive. It's not something that's happening right now. Alicia hit Chris.
You left out the on.
No, I didn't. I really didn't. And Alicia's going to hit me. Okay. Okay, we find this in a lot of places because people want to make them softer. People want to make the sentence softer. For example, we see things like, she was assaulted. Okay, not necessarily Alicia. I'm just saying, in headlines, we see the girl was assaulted. Because we don't want to say the girl was assaulted by her date. Right? Because to write it the other way is too hard. It hits too hard. It's too active. It feels too present. So we want to make it softer. We talk this way a lot. I say, I was given this thing for Christmas. You know, we talk this way a lot. It gets into our language a lot. But as a history academic writer, which y'all are temporarily for the length and duration of this class, you want things to be as solid and as informationally clear as possible. So when we look at these sentences that are on here, let me see. Oh, look, they're all 5 there now. My PowerPoint updated. Okay. When we look at these sentences that are here, which I'm just going to move over to my Word doc so I can mess with them. Okay, John Locke's words were used by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. So who did the thing in this sentence?
Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson.
What did he do?
He used John Locke's words in the Declaration of
Right.
Independence.
So you ask yourself about this question, what's the thing that's happening and who's the one who did the thing? So, and then you shift the sentence around so that that's at the beginning. So instead of John Locke's words, Thomas Jefferson used John Locke's words in the Declaration of Independence. Do you see how this sentence reads more clearly than this one? Do you see how it's more straightforward? It strengthens your writing to identify passive voice and change it so that it's not passive anymore. The easiest things to identify are is, am, are, were, was. If you see those in there anywhere, check it for now. There are sentences where it's not passive voice to use those. For example, Chris was running for his life. Is not a passive sentence. He was running is the verb. And it was Chris who was doing it. So Chris was running for his life when Alicia hit him. Okay, Chris was running for his life is not a passive sentence, even though it has this word in it. But sure would be easier to just change it to that. Then you could be sure. Okay, now it's tricky sometimes because sometimes these words are hiding behind other words. So you have to ask yourself, well, could that word be there? Let me see if I can think of an example.
Unsuccessful.
Okay, but if you find these words in your sentences anywhere, chances are the reason they're in there is because you're using passive voice. So ask yourself if there's any way to just get rid of them. Rewrite the sentence, turn the whole sentence around if you have to just get rid of those words. Is, am, are, were, was, be. There's another one, sorry. Very rarely will you find that, but any of those. The other thing you can ask yourself is, could this sentence be ended with something else? So Chris was hit. Let's say Chris was killed. It's easier. Okay, if I put Chris was killed, yeah, if I say Chris was killed, and I don't include any other information, if I put by zombies at the end of that sentence, is there any reason to believe that's not true, other than maybe you don't believe in zombies, right? So the Declaration of Independence was written in 1776. This is a passive sentence, okay? Is it possible? Could you put by zombies at the end of this sentence? By zombies. And still have it be technically a grammatically correct sentence? That would make for an interesting American history. It's probably not true, but if you could put that, that means there's something missing from your sentence that needs to be there. Who wrote it? Because if it could have been by zombies, it could have been by anybody. So, by Thomas Jefferson. Now, it's still a passive sentence, but now you have all the information in it. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. That's active voice. Do you see the difference? Okay, so your first step to identifying if you've got passive voice is something is look for these words. You might still not, but get rid of them anyway. If there's any way to get rid of them, get rid of them. And I don't mean just Chris killed. Don't do that. Figure out how you can rewrite the sentence so that the was or the is or the were is not in there anymore. Figure out a way to rewrite the sentence so it doesn't use that word. That's the easiest way to eliminate passive voice. I'll tell you a secret. When I first started working as a TA here for Dr. Waggy, he thought I was really good at not writing in passive voice because I never wrote in passive voice. None of my essays were in passive voice, but I didn't actually know how to identify passive voice. I just knew that those words were bad. And so every essay I ever turned into him never had any passive voice in it because I went through and I found every example of those words and got rid of them. Rewrote the sentences so they didn't have them in there. That was the thing I did that made Dr. Waggy think I was really good at this. Then he gave me papers to grade for the first time and I circled all the places where people had used these and he was like, these aren't all passive voice. What are you doing? So he actually had to teach me this because nobody had ever actually taught me this. But I will tell you as a shortcut, this works really well. Get rid of these words. So your assignment for today, which I'll give you really fast because we're out of time. Your assignment for today is actually a passive voice assignment. You're going to go into section 2, interaction, week 6, new ideals, and I'll change that so it has a due date. I'm going to make this available. You have 5 sentences, and they're the 5 that are on that slide. John Locke's words were used by Isaac Newton was colonists for tax. Those are 5 passive voice sentences. All I want you to do is rewrite them as active voice. Turn around in the assignment and just rewrite them as active voice. You get 1 point for each of them. If I send it back to you with less than a 5, I'll tell you which sentences you got wrong. Okay? And if it doesn't help to just pile more words into them because I've had students do that before where they're like, well, I want it to be as active as possible. So John Locke's really poetic words were used by Thomas Jefferson, who really respected him in the Declaration of Independence, which made a big difference. That's still passive voice because you didn't fix the one thing that needed to be fixed, which was that the person who did the thing is at the end of the sentence instead of at the beginning. That's the one thing you have to fix. So I kind of gave you the first one. I hope you got it. But that's your assignment for today. Any questions? No? How about Zoom? Y'all got any questions?